include the E factor in these factor combinations. And that is because it's a secondary modifying factor that relates to decision-making styles rather than behavioral drives. It is part of a different theoretical framework, so it isn't part of any factor combinations. So those are the 6 different factor combinations. How do we read them? Well, in this example, this person's dominance factor, their A factor, is their highest factor, so it's the farthest to the right, and their patience factor, C, is lowest, it's farthest to the left. When we write factor combinations, we always write the highest factor first, followed by the greater than symbol, followed by the lower factor of the two. So in this case, we would say this person has A over C, and we would write it as A greater than C. Does that make sense? So regardless of whether a factor is high or low, when we are doing factor combinations, we always start with the higher of the two factors is greater than the lower of the two factors.
Can I ask a quick question, Curtis?
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you suggesting, or I might be jumping ahead, that really there's only one factor combination that applies to someone and it's the extremes of their profile? No. Okay. But that's just how you're reading each individual one.
Correct, yeah. So the widest factor combination, in this case, this is the widest factor combination. Just like the farthest away drive, it's the factor combination that they're going to feel most. Like this is the thing that you're going to see the most with that person. But all factor combinations exist, which is a great segue to tell me in the chat, what are the 6 different factor combinations? Is this, so let's start with AB. That's a factor combination. Is this person A over B or B? Andrea, you already got it. Okay, great. B over A, right? I'm going to draw on my screen. This person's B is greater than their A. So we would say B over A. Oh my goodness, drawing with a mouse. Great. And that means they are people-oriented. Fantastic. Okay, let's look at the AC factor combination. Is this person A over C or C over A?
C over A.
C over A. Excellent. So this is an example where both of them are on the lower side, right? But because this one is higher than this one, we say C over A. Excellent. Is this making sense? I see.
Can you go over it just one more time for me, please?
Absolutely. Yes, that's why I'm here. So when we look at those two, we pick 2 factors that we're talking about. Let's say in that example, it was the C factor and the A factor. When we are talking about a factor combination, we look at which is the higher factor. And remember, high to the right and low is to the left. It really doesn't have anything to do with the midpoint here. The farther to the right you are, the higher you are for that factor, even if, in this case, this person is lower on their patience, but it is still higher than their dominance factor. So in that case, when we're looking at C and A, C is greater than A. So we always start with the higher of the 2 factors is greater than the lower of the 2 factors. Good? Okay. Next, let's talk about the A and the D factors. Is this person A over D or D over A? And Vicky, yes, it is always higher to lower. So yes, this person is D over A. Fantastic. How about BC? Perfect, yes. So B is higher, C is lower, B over C. Great. B and D. Excellent, yes. Just by a hair, oh, that's a real straight line. Just by a hair, B is higher than D, so they're both high. This person is driven by both their people orientation and their rules and structure, or rules and structure. But they are more driven by their extroversion, so they are going to be B over D. And last one, C and D. How would you say that? Excellent. D over C. Perfect. So now we know how to notate factor combinations. Let's talk about what they mean. One extra piece. So I said always. I mean, you should never say always. Sometimes you might have two factors that are right on top of each other or very, very close. You might even have that in your own pattern. In those cases, we would say B equals D. The equal sign means they are stacked, which means they're basically equal. One is no more driven than the other. Yes, Rhonda.
How do you rate it then in a case where the person's scores are situational, meaning midpoint?
So, if they have something on the midpoint, that's okay. You're still looking like in reference to the other drives that you're comparing it against. So C, in this case, let's just move it over a little bit and say, what if the C were actually here? It's still C over A, it's B over C, it's D over C. However, sometimes you have a special person called Zwaya who is an adapter. And that means their drives are all basically on the midpoint. Very, very close. And in that case, you're using the equal sign a whole lot. A whole lot. Yeah, thank you, Zwaya. So a little bit out there on the A, but almost, I mean, everything is still situational. So in Zwaya's case, you could probably say A over B, because she is more driven by her dominance and her extroversion. But the B and the C and the D, the B and the D, all of those are really close to each other. So you're using a lot of equal signs. Yeah, good question. Okay. The other really fun thing is even more nuance. Where the factors are also tells you about that person. So there are 3 different variations for each factor combination. Sometimes you have something that is both low, when both of the factors are on the low side of the midpoint. Sometimes you have both on the high side, and sometimes they go across the midpoint. So all of the patterns here for these 3 people are A over B. This is described as task-oriented, right? However, where they fall in relation to the midpoint matters in how an individual shows up at work. So for example, Lori is task-oriented, but both of them are low. Aaron crosses the midpoint. Combinations that cross the midpoint usually result in a stronger expression of behavior. For any combination that crosses the midpoint, you would want to use the description on the top halves of the pages between 8 and 13. And I think I actually have, yes, okay. I jump forward a little bit just to make this a little bit more clear. When you are looking at those pages that have the factor combinations, the top of the page are for factor combinations that cross the midpoint. The bottom left is when both of those factors are on the low side, and the bottom right is both factors on the high side. So there are two halves of that page, and then there are three sections. It's kind of crazy, but that's how you should interpret the information there. And then also, there are two halves vertically. So on the left-hand side, you have A over B, for example. On the right-hand side, you have B over A. And then you can still also consider this cut here and here. I wish PI had included those lines to make it a little bit clearer, but does that make sense when you're looking at interpreting this? Because this is information that you're going to use as you are preparing for your readbacks. Make sense?
Can you go over that one more time again?
Yes. When you are looking at this factor combination page, it is split in the middle because you have one factor combination on the left, one factor combination on the right. For example, we're looking at the A-B factor combination. On the left-hand side of that page, you've got A over B, which means a person is task-oriented. And on the right-hand side, you've got B over A, which means that person is people-oriented. In addition to that, there's also a top part and a bottom part because factor combinations can go across the midpoint. And when that is the case, you're going to look at the common workplace behaviors that are on the top half of that page. And then sometimes both of the factors are on the same side of the midpoint. At the bottom, yeah, there we go.
Got it.
At the bottom, you got both low and both high.
Gotcha.
Yes, it is confusing, and I apologize for that. When we are talking, when you have an equal sign, so like we talked about with Zawaya, you're just pulling from everywhere. you're pulling from what makes, what resonates the most, because it really all depends. It depends on the situation. It's probably easiest if you're pulling from the top part of that page because they cross the midpoint, but you would be pulling from both sides because in some situations you might be maybe a little bit more direct and to the point. In some situations you might be more empathetic and social. It all depends. Yeah, great. So let's practice, or actually let's learn first. We have to learn. Starting with AB. So remember, this is all about task or people orientation. In the workshop companion, so let's put into practice what I just taught you about how to look at that page. We are going to focus on the top part. So B's, as I just said, cross the midpoint, right? So when you are answering these questions or looking at these answers, we're focusing on the top, the northern half of the page. When someone has a dominance drive on the high side and an extroversion drive on the low side, they are A over B. So they are task oriented. And that means that they are typically, when it comes to communicating, they are direct and to the point. When it comes to delegating authority, there we go, they find it difficult. Because they like to have that control over how things are going, it can be difficult for them to give up authority to other people. They're focused on getting the task done, and they're probably going to do it their way. When it comes to problem solving, someone who is task-oriented, A over B, comes up with creative solutions, and they probably do so in more of an analytical, reserved fashion because they're not people-oriented. They're not going to be talking things out with other people. They're going to do things on their own. And then finally, when it comes to making decisions, it's probably mostly decide and announce. And that's because they have that drive for controlling things, being autonomous, being independent, leading in their way. and they're not really focused on the people in the situation. So I've made my decision, and I'm going to announce it to you. I skipped over it, but these are